I would define success as truly making an enjoyable experience for my players while getting the most out of every single person on our roster. There's really those four core values that I hope to have, as well as instill with our coaching staff and players. And those would be our work ethic, our team unity, positivity, and resilience. Corrected. And we always like to say being demanding without being demeaning when it comes to that correction piece. And then, that resilience piece is huge for us as well.
Hello and welcome to the Reflective Coach podcast with me, Coach Luca. I hope you've been enjoying the recent content and episodes that's been released lately, because each interviewee, each guest that appears on the podcast has so much to share in terms of their experiences, their insights, their thoughts, their philosophies, as well as how they approach each of their games, their man management, their player management, recruitment, tactics, strategies, as well as a wide array of other insights that they're able to share on the podcast. I love sharing new content and new episodes with you, so you continue to add to your learning, continue to take much away, continue to reflect and take on as much feedback as possible. However, every episode adds much more to the coaching journey and your journey as well as myself as a host and someone listening to each of these interviewees on the other end of the podcast. I enjoy these podcasts as much as yourselves, and I really enjoy getting them out there with you. However, I'm delighted to welcome women's head coach of basketball, the first male basketball coach to appear on the podcast. So an alternative sport other than soccer and football that we usually hear, and the podcast's second basketball guest interviewee to feature on the podcast, Jake Nannen. It was great to have Jake on, because right throughout I could feel his energy, I could feel the insights, what he's able to bring from his player development point of view, and what he does for his players and how he brings that together in a team element, as well as inspiring teaching and learning from throughout, combining that role as teacher and coach together as one, with a history and a family recognition for what they do behind him, to combining that into taking that away as to why he's in basketball and what he's able to bring his players and teams. I loved speaking to Jake, and it was great to really hear from him, and I took so much away as he was talking. As we were chatting, you can see my head dip throughout constantly, because I'm taking so many notes and points where he's got so much to say and offer. Within this episode, we talk about values, ways to get better, outcomes and that process orientation, feedback and terminology, and I really love this quote: demanding without being demeaning. Now, I hope you really listen for that throughout the podcast episode, because it is really a touch-based moment and something to really reflect upon. We talked about defining player development, having a clear plan, control what you can control, areas of improvement, a strengths-based approach, master of all but master of none. Again, another key consideration and a top-tier quote for you to really listen out for and to really get the notes and thoughts around that. We talked about tangibles, we talked about then success, positive approaches and feedback, which is critical. We talked about clear, concise, positive imagery and feedback. We talked about game day routines, service more as a reminder in terms of how we take that feedback on board. Keep it simple, stupid. Again, another great quote to take away. When I thought about episode titles, I thought about the player development episode. I thought about keep it simple, stupid. And that's really thought-provoking. And there were so many different ones which I weighed up, so you're going to have to wait and see what one I offered. But there are so many great quotes in this. So overall, we talk about player development, resilience, strong habits, simplification, day-by-day processes, the process orientation, game day routines, servicing reminders, feedback, and so much more on this podcast episode. As said, I truly enjoyed this one, and it is such a top tier episode. I hope you enjoy this episode with Jake, and I hope you continue to add to your notes, add to your journal, and take much away, because I have, and I'm the one on the other end delivering this to you as a community. But as said, there is much to take away, and I hope that these notes continue to add value to your coaching journey, and as well as the wider community, even if you're not working in coaching or you're in a professional area elsewhere. I hope that we can really add to these reflections and much for you to take away in terms of both personal and professional life. But if you could drop the podcast a like, a follow, a subscribe, and a comment, it does really help. I'm Anthony_Luca96, as you can see on screen. It is at TRC Podcast _ on Twitter. It is the Reflective Coach Podcast everywhere else. You can listen to the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, Podcast Addict, and find the podcast on LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, as well as Flickr. There are so many different social media outlets for the podcast, but hoping that you can really help on YouTube, Spotify, LinkedIn and Twitter as the main focus points. Don't forget to drop those likes, those follows, those subscribes. They do really help the podcast thrive and grow, and hope that you continue to share as much as possible and get others connected to the podcast, because these guests certainly do have the respect, but they deserve to get the listens, the views, and everyone connected to them to share their wonderful stories, because they've committed that wonderful time to really help in the podcast, but to share these stories centered around what their great works are about. This is Anthony_Luca96 at TRC Podcast on Twitter. This is the Reflective Coach Podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Drop that like, drop that follow, drop that subscribe, leave a comment. It does really help the podcast. It's a big thank you from me, and I'll see you soon.
If you give players too many things to work on, we believe in that philosophy of a master of all is a master of none. So if we can reinforce those strengths that we see again and again and again, and maybe focus on one area of improvement per summer or per year that that player can improve upon, by the time we're finished with them through those 4 years of high school, they have become, hopefully, elite. It's been a whirlwind time of the year. How about yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. Actually, very similar. Looking at a new classroom that I'm moving into next year as well for myself. So just having the chat with the original member of staff that's currently in there and feeling like I'm evicting them from their room. But all positive signs. We're coming towards the end of the year, so 3 weeks left of our school terms, and then up again in September. But it's this sort of nice time now where we're regenerating for the year to come, and yeah, it's a good point to be at.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
So when it comes to that 4th of July then, what's that about then?
Yeah, so just celebrating America and, everything that goes along with that. And it's usually a great time to hit the lake, celebrate with friends and family. Obviously, you have the fireworks as well. So really just celebrating America and everything that we stand for.
I love that. We don't have anything like that in Britain, and everything that I'm seeing on Twitter, the big showcase events, the promotion of players, the attraction, how big sports is, the growth of it. Very jealous of seeing what's going on in America right now. But and I've got a cousin out there who's currently doing a Camp America, so she's only been out a couple of weeks and is completely loving life, and it just makes you want to come out more and more. But very jealous right now.
Yeah, feel free to come over at any time. I mean, I'm definitely interested in traveling to some places overseas as well, just to get, a different look at how the world works. So
Absolutely, yeah. But I think America is amazing because, you've got soccer, baseball, basketball, then you've got boxing over there, and then an array of other ones. But, there's so many different sports, American football in itself, not to forget the main, the big name one that fights us for our name. But there are so many different sports which athletes go into, whereas, we sort of got that here, but our big national sports are football, rugby, and then, everything else that filters under that as it would. But in America, it's so big and the stage is huge. And, as you've got high schools built for basketball and things like that, and then you've got the American football fields and now soccer fields and so on, we, have just a typical sports hall with maybe a football field, nothing on the levels that America have.
For sure. And it really is crazy how big of a piece of life athletics are in America, really from youth up to the professional level. So you're right. There's a ton of great options. And yeah, people get invested with it from a young age as they continue to develop. And, especially with specialized sports, you hope that kids play as many of those sports as they can growing up. But especially at the high school level, they become a little more specialized. And you know how it goes with special trainers to work on specific sports. So a lot of great opportunities. But yes, a major piece of American life is athletics, which is great.
Massively, and I completely agree with that. And when it comes to that specialisation, then in football we're starting to have throw in and set piece coaches, so they might work on how to get the ball into throw, how to get it into play, how to exploit that, and then set piece might be a free kick, corner, and so on, and how they can specialise that. So when it comes to basketball, then do you have anything like that on your coaching team where you might have a specific or specialised coach who might be a set piece in basketball, for example, or anything like that?
Definitely. On the basketball side, we'd love to take the football coaching staff approach and American football, albeit on a much bigger scale with their coaching staff. On the basketball side of things, you'd love to have your quote unquote offensive coordinator that can focus more on skill development, your overall program philosophy on offense. You'd also hope to get maybe a defensive coordinator as well, someone that can focus more on the defensive side of things. You'd want someone to be even focused more on the special teams if possible, which in basketball is your baseline plays, press breakers, sideline plays. So in a perfect world, I think that is a goal to try to take that approach to having coaches on your staff that have specialized focus and strengths in all of those different areas on the court. Not always possible with the smaller numbers than a football staff, but definitely something you'd hope for.
Absolutely, and it sounds great in terms of what you're doing. So, I'm not sure if you wanted to introduce yourself and give yourself a bit more of a background and maybe your journey to currently where you're at now.
Yeah, that'd be great. Well, my name's Jake Nannen, and I'm currently the head girls basketball coach at Elkhorn South High School, which is in a suburb of Omaha, Nebraska. We compete at the Class A level in the high school ranks, which is grades 9 through 12. And we're at the highest class in Nebraska, which we call Class A. And, just growing up from youth on, basketball has always been a major importance of mine. And coming from a basketball family with my grandpa being a coach around the state of Nebraska, some of my uncles being well-known coaches around the area, that's kind of naturally trickled down to me. And once I did graduate high school from Lincoln, a school in Lincoln, Nebraska, I went to a university called Morningside University up in Sioux City, Iowa, and played basketball there for 3 years. And before my senior year, I ended up quitting and got into the coaching realm and actually started my first year of coaching on the boys' side at a small school in Sioux City, Iowa. And once I graduated from Morningside, I moved back to Lincoln, Nebraska, which is where I'm originally born, and officially began my teaching and coaching career. Actually spent some time at my alma mater, Lincoln Southeast High School, for a year, coaching junior varsity boys, which is just a step down from the varsity level. And I also coached at a high school called Lincoln Southwest High School in Lincoln for a year as well as a varsity assistant. And then, as you know, coaching journeys can be wild. I spent my last 3 seasons down in a small town in Nebraska called Superior, which is right on the Nebraska-Kansas border. And I was the head girls basketball coach there for 3 seasons before taking the opportunity to advance my career up in Elkhorn South at a Class A school. So it's definitely been a wild journey. I've learned a lot, still learning a lot. But those are just some details of how I've gotten into my current role at Elkhorn South.
And that's a great journey so far, and so many different roles and experiences, which has helped maybe shape your philosophy and coaching style to date so far. But how come you quit your year just before senior year then, and that decision behind that?
Yeah, so definitely a major decision for me. As you know, when you put so much time and blood and sweat and tears into a sport that you love, it always hurts when you realize you're probably not going to be able to compete at the level you want to compete at. So when I was up at Morningside University, we had a lot of talent. We actually won our conference championship my freshman year, won our regular season championship our second year, and I didn't play much. And by the time my junior year rolled around, had the opportunity to get on the floor And as simple as can be, I wasn't where I wanted to be on the court. And before our senior year began, we went through our preseason conditioning, and I made the decision that it wasn't for me to play the rest of my senior year. I wasn't going to get the opportunities I had hoped for with some players they had coming in, but I still wanted to be a part of the game. And that was when I really got lucky with the opportunity to, although I stopped my playing career, I could get right into coaching to kind of fill that void. And that had been something I wanted to pursue as is. So it was definitely a tough realization, but I think it worked out for the best as I began my coaching journey.
And I think so as well because it's hard sometimes to get into the sports and the coaching side of it, especially if your heart was set on playing or you wanted to go on and play, and sometimes you might go into coaching and realize it's not for you, or maybe it's not the route, etc. But it's great that you've had that journey, that experience, and also you've been shaped by those in your family who have been able to be coaches. So you've had that insight and been able to see what they've gone through, and maybe it's helped educate you to some extent to going, right, these are the hours I need to put in, this is the travel, it's hard to manage players and other stakeholders and so on. But also being a player yourself and not getting that game time or not where you want to be, for example, how does that sort of shape your management and your delivery style with your players, and how do you take that into consideration?
Yeah, I think it helps me become much more understanding to those players that might be in a situation I've been in. And through that process, I think it was always important for me to understand that honesty goes a long ways with players and their potential roles. Because just like me, they're putting a lot of time in. They're putting that blood and sweat in to hope to be successful for your program. So I think through that journey that I experienced, I'm able to put my shoes to where the players would be in a situation that's similar to that and be a little more empathetic while still telling them what needs to be said, but allowing them to, do it in a way where they can understand where we're coming from as well.
And that's good because, understanding players and understanding about that time that they put in. A great quote that I heard last week was, once an hour's lived, it's dead forever. And that's resonated with me since, and that's something that I'm going to carry because it's absolutely true. And that's something which I go about in my philosophy and how I work with my players, because once they go past the ages, 6, 7, 8 and so on, and you continue coaching them, they can never repeat those years or repeat those moments of their lives. So when they're in their 20s and looking back and maybe going, oh, I wish I had more play time, or I wish my coach gave me more, or I wish there was more training, or I wish I could go back and be with the team again, they literally can't. So whilst I have them at that age and I'm able to work with them, I want to maximise every opportunity so they can go on, and once they are in their 20s, they can look back with fondness and go, I wish I could still do that, but you know what, I actually enjoyed it, because we don't get that time back. So it is hard, and sometimes, when it comes down to it,
We've got motion detector lights. I apologize.
that's right, no problems. And sometimes when it comes down to it, some coaches don't realise that the time that we're playing with, and they don't get this time back, or they might only realistically have 2 years left within the sport. So that time is absolutely essential. It's a good thing that you have that realisation of it, and that experience, and you can shape that in terms of your philosophy. So you can be open and honest with players, and if they decide to move on for a program, or move on from sports, or wherever you might take that beyond where you're at now, and maybe different levels, it just helps a player maybe come to realise, right, I'm not at this level, or why would I want to commit more time to doing something when I might not benefit, or be on the bench every week and I'm not getting the minutes the others are. There's a lot of considerations in that. So I think it's good that as much as being a hard experience for you, it's one that you can take into good stead within your coaching.
100%. And like we said, just that honesty is the best policy of making sure players maybe before a season or in the summer know where they are. So, they can adjust their goals, they can adjust their work ethic and those areas of improvement that they need in order to be successful, while also keeping that in the back of their mind from the coaching staff. I think is a very important connection that needs to be stated.
And you touched upon it there, honesty and maybe that connection, but what other values do you have within your coaching style then, and maybe your philosophy?
Yeah, so within our program and within my own vision for what we want to do at a new spot, there's really those 4 core values that I hope to have, as well as instill with our coaching staff and players. And those would be our work ethic, our team unity, positivity, and resilience. We really believe that if in everything we do, we can be the hardest working team in the state, whether it's on the court, in the classroom, as individuals. That really lays the foundation for everything that we hope to become. And that's something we're constantly emphasizing day in and day out, is that work ethic piece. And for the time that we're together, always trying to find a way to get better. And with that team unity piece, of course, we want to build great team chemistry on the court, but maybe more importantly, we want to develop that team chemistry off the court and really build those lifelong memories together that will hopefully in turn make us more united on the court. So just that unity aspect of not just, the varsity team or the freshman team, but as a whole program, just being close and connected, we think can make a real difference in the long run. And with that positivity piece, what we mean by that is, that high energy, specific feedback to reinforce what we want to emphasize on the court. And I think there's a misconception that when programs are all about quote unquote positivity, that, it's all sunshine and rainbows. And that's just not the case. We can have that high energy and instill that confidence with our players in a positive way while still holding those high expectations and correcting things that need to be corrected. And we always like to say being demanding without being demeaning when it comes to that correction piece. And then, that resilience piece is huge for us as well. And a big piece of my coaching philosophy. Basketball is a long season. And we really believe that basketball is a safe avenue for players to work on those resiliency skills, whether it be after a bad shooting game. Maybe they had broken up with a relationship with a significant other. And really being able to instill that perseverance in these players, where in life, there's going to be much more serious things that happen to them as opposed to having an off shooting night or having a turnover. So building those resiliency pieces not only are beneficial for success on the court, but also hopefully as players continue to grow and move on, they can take really all of those core values that our coaching staff has instilled with them to be successful as future careers, college, whatever their goals might be personally.
And I love that you've gone into detail on your values and how that may work and how that looks in terms of the college as well. And I've loved that you're on about making memories, that you're on about that unity and off the field as well. And there's some that I've held in good stead and ones that I've really applied with my team. So it's great to sort of hear that and connect with someone who I can relate my experiences with in the back of my mind and go, do you know what, that's good and that's going on, and that could be something that I could take away or so on. But it is great that you are doing that, because that team unity, as we said, once they're in their 20s and they are looking at those memories, realistically, they want to look back and go, do you know what, I'm actually still friends with, Josie, or I'm friends with Katie, or we still have those good connections, or if I need to get in touch with them, then I could. And sometimes off the field is so important, because just going for a team dinner or just going for a team outing or just doing something different is really important and really exciting as well, because, you can really look into it and the players are going to enjoy it, because it's not all just about on the pitch. We look at technical ability, then we want to develop all their characteristics, confidence and so on. But once it comes down to it, off the field can just allow them to burn those energies, or you can see a different side of them in terms of their friendship or how you might do a problem solving challenge. So for me, off the field is so important as on the field as well. So I think that's great, and I truly love that quote that I've wrote down, be demanding without being demeaning, because that's really true, because sometimes coaches can be so demanding, they have those high expectations, and they might have some core values that they hold, but sometimes in the way that they have their terminology, their communication and so on, they might be actually demeaning without realizing. So that perspective is important, because there's a lot around terminology, there's a lot about the language which we deploy. So without being demeaning, I think it's about being honest, being open, as you said, and then really how you can deliver that sort of feedback and that information to the players, which is so key.
No doubt. And to your point about those team activity, whether it's just getting off the court and going to do something with your team, I think it's really important for not only them to build that chemistry with each other, but it's also good for the players to see the coaching staff kind of in that more lighthearted, fun way that you might not always see on the court. And, I think a lot of people, they organize those things with good intentions, but are they really making sure that the unity aspect is getting put into place? For example, we just took our team, our whole program, to an escape room. And as you know, those can be good ways to kind of lighten the mood, problem solve together. But one thing we did is we were very precise with how we wanted to group our program. Because if we just let them choose their own group, so to speak, you're going to get those seniors grouped together with those seniors, those sophomores grouped together with those sophomores. And that would defeat the purpose, right? So we wanted to really make sure that we were combining all grade levels together. And, in the long run, you hope as you purposefully plan for that over time, everyone just gets closer and closer and closer. So just food for thought there. Yes, it's great to take those kids bowling. It's great to do laser tag, whatever you want to do. But think about how you can even take it to the next step and maybe purposefully group kids together to build that bond.
And I think that's an absolute key point there, purposely grouping kids together and trying to create those relationships, because sometimes you might go and do that bowling, for example, and then it might be a team or competitive, and that's a great objective or a great outcome to really have. But then sometimes you might see those run straight to their mates or try and get to the better technical players, and then they're grouping themselves together naturally. So therefore what you might see in training might be replicated on those off-field activities as well. So you're not really having those interlinks and overcoming those barriers which might exist, because as you said, those groups might come naturally. Whereas if you end up grouping it and you're like, right, I broke that barrier, or they're suddenly connected and they never realised anything they had, they're communicating with each other, or this player who might be less technical on the field, actually what they might realise is that they're a really good communicator and organiser, and then the other player who might be more technical might be realising that they are their good leader and how they can respond and connect with them and have that relationship. So there's so many important elements, and I think you've asked a good question there about that team unity, and I think that's good. I think you've set a good objective, and I think you make a good point on groupings, because sometimes we can do tasks, we might have a thought in our head how we might like it to go and so on, but realistically if there's an objective behind it, then there's a lot of positivity and a lot more outcomes that will come around it because of that.
Yeah, and that was a good point you made of how that can trickle onto the field or court as well. Maybe there is a freshman that is 3 years away from being a senior, and you know how it is, we've all been there, where you're not necessarily afraid of being around some of those older players, but you're just a little bit uncomfortable. And when you can kind of break that barrier and get those younger kids mixed with those older kids, I think you do start seeing it trickle onto the court, where maybe the next shooting or skills basketball session you have, that senior's thinking, well, wait a second, I saw that freshman at the escape room. She was in my group, and I enjoyed getting to know her. I mean, maybe I'll pull her over to our shooting group at a certain station, and we can start working together on the court as well. So, just those connections are critical.
And I love that what you said about, that connection right throughout your program as well, where you're all aligned on what you're doing. Because when I was head of coaching and I took over at one club, what I realised from my other clubs is we might have, say, a U16s and then a U19s and then a U7s, but none of these teams really sort of knew each other, and therefore the coaches didn't know each other. So there was no best practice internally for coaches to learn off each other or challenge or have that support, or could you take my team for the weekend, or there was no opportunity for CPD or professional learning, whereby an under sixes coach might go work with the seniors and a seniors coach might work with the younger groups. The other players didn't know when the other groups were training, so parents couldn't refer younger kids in, and or there wasn't that, all the teams were training at different times. The players didn't really know each other, but we're all supposed to be one club. So when I really took over as head of coaching, it's like, right, what are our values? How can we all train at the same time and then maybe play at the same time? Can we all be at the same venue? So therefore the 16s might get to know the 8-year-olds and so on. So then you're creating that real community and that unity. So you might have those under 11s going off to high school next year. Suddenly they know the high school players of the older age groups, and they've got those relationships and they're connecting. And then they might be having an opportunity to go up and train with the older age groups, or they might be invited in, or they could drop in and support. So it created that real collective community, but it created a high quality performance program as well, quite naturally, because all these kids were getting to know each other, and then everything else about around that wider community with the stakeholders really benefited. But I love what you're doing there, because in the flip side of what we've done, I saw a lot of outcomes in terms of that, and you've touched upon how that looks as well for your program.
Yeah, and with that being said, I think you took the right strategy right away, and that's something I'm hoping to do as well. And with that being said, I don't think it needs to be something that gets done every single time, because I think that would slowly create resentment with your program for those team activities. If you're always grouping those older kids with the younger kids, that might not necessarily be the most fun thing for them every single time. Because of course they're going to want to hang out with their friends as well on the same grade level. So I think, and that's the trick, right? Finding that delicate balance between purposefully grouping and kind of allowing them to explore, and to try to keep it fresh and not create that resentment for what you hope to be those fun activities. So
absolutely, and I think that's good as well, not to overkill it and make sure you get that right balance, because sometimes you might have I want to group them with the older kids, I want that physical challenge, and I want them to be technically challenged and so on. But realistically, if they're with the older kids and the older kids getting more touches, or they got more time on the ball, or they've got more possession, or they're doing really well, and sometimes they might knock the confidence and so on. But then these players, at the end of the day, they still want to come to training because at the end of the day they love basketball, they love soccer, they love the football or whatever. But sometimes they've been having a long day in school, or they might want to blow off steam, or they might just want to see the teammates that they're used to seeing. And sometimes you might throw them in and going, right, we're training with the older age group today, and they're like, oh really? Because they just want to just come in, enjoy training, and just be with their mates. So I think that's again key points there within itself, and getting that balance is absolutely critical. So it's about getting that right.
Yeah, no, and even connecting that to on the court, like you just mentioned, very important, because again, you want to have that line of where those younger kids can be competitive and push themselves against those older kids specific to the sport, but you also don't want to put them too far and mix them with a level that they can't compete in, and that leads to frustration. So just finding that boundary of being able to push them while also helping them be successful.
Of course. And you touched upon it earlier in terms of your team. So you got that unity, you got off the field activities, you're connecting in terms of the wider community as well. You got those values. So you're obviously finding ways to get better all the time as a team. But when it comes down to improving your team and continuously applying, what other ways would you identify or look for in terms of getting better?
Yeah. So one of the main pieces for on the court improvement specifically is that player development piece. And, player development is a very cliche term that a lot of people throw around nowadays. And I think it's important for us to be able to define that player development as a comprehensive way for our players to improve within the 4 years they're in your program, whether that be on the court or off the court as leaders, teammates, etc. And I think it's important to have a specific plan with your player development to kind of be able to sit back and look at not only player strengths, but also areas of improvement. We never call them weaknesses. We always call it areas of improvement. And, I'd say our player development philosophy is more of a strengths-based approach, where we're really looking to refine players' individual strengths as basketball players, and maybe pinpointing one area of improvement that players can improve upon during an off season, during the season itself. So I did have some notes on this, by the way. So while I'm exploring those, how would you define your player development piece for whatever sport it may be? Do you view that more as specific to on the field or on the court, or do you view it as a more comprehensive approach to the overall player and their improvement while they're with you?
I love that. I love a kickback question, and that's only the second time that's happened. But I think it's good, because then I was going to ask you what do you define as player development. But I think that holistic view for me is what makes a player development. So if I see a player come into the club, and then realistically I can look at a 2-year period and we can reflect back on that 2 year after that 2 year. What can I see? Can I see a growth in confidence? Can I see a growth in communication? Can I see a growth in relationships? How have they taken on leadership? And then how can I identify their relationships with their coaching? How have they approach learning in a different way? Can they give me that game intelligence or game understanding? And then will I really look at that technical side? So are they how many minutes did they get in year 1, and how many minutes are they getting in year 2? So are they developing technically? So if I'm edging too much on, say, maybe their character, and therefore we're lacking minutes, then we're lacking on that technical ability to improve holistically. And same for vice versa. So they might be getting a lot of minutes, but can this one real technical player, who might be one of our better players, can they improve to be a better team player? Can they take on that leadership ownership responsibility. So I think it's that sort of two-way race where I want to make it holistic, where both A and B are moving up gridlock with each other. So on the field and off the field are really working hand in hand with each other. Then we identify that in terms of our player development overall and action. So realistically, it's that holistic approach, how we can interlink on the field with off the field, and how can that look maybe over a 1 year to 2 year period, and then how do we identify the minutes to make sure that they're getting the maximum game time on the field technically, and how are they hitting their three other pillars of the four, in terms of that approach and what we're doing. So again, we might do a bit of grouping, and we might do that with mentoring. So as part of a coaching team I've been very lucky to have 2 or 3 coaches on board, and we group the players in terms of personality. So we've actually utilised the Myers-Briggs personality test, and then we used it with colours. So those colours are built on their personalities and then how we could relate with coaches. And those coaches would deliver the same mentoring session, but they would deliver it in the way that they wanted to. And it ended up allowing us to really then identify, right, where are these weaknesses in the players after so long in the program. So once these players who maybe have some weaknesses, we might then group them again and put them with a coach who might have that strength in that area. So we really worked in harmony, we worked in synergy, but overall, and the outcome is holistic player development, and how this works together hand in hand. So yeah, if that's my definition of player development, is that holistic approach on and off the field in a simple term.
Yeah, we would agree. And I think a lot of times coaches get caught up with the development of the player on the court as opposed to the leadership aspects and the teammate aspect. And, specific to the player development on the court, like I mentioned before with that strengths-based approach, we believe that if we can reinforce and improve those strengths, as opposed to always pinpointing areas of weaknesses, we can see faster development. And I think it's important to give those areas of improvement in that honest, delicate way, but really give them only 1 or 2 areas of focus throughout an off season or throughout a season. Because if you give players too many things to work on, we believe in that philosophy of a master of all is a master of none. So if we can reinforce those strengths that we see again and again and again, and maybe focus on one area of improvement per summer or per year that player can improve upon, by the time we're finished with them through those 4 years of high school, they have become hopefully elite at their strengths, and they have hopefully slowly but surely improved about 3 or 4 areas of weakness that they can hope to improve on. And some ways we can track that is probably most importantly through season statistics, with pinpointing those areas that these players wanted to succeed in as an area of improvement, and hope that some of our small-sided games and training philosophy that we want to use does in fact impact that player's improvement. And there are a lot of intangibles that go into that. How bought in is the player? Is the player working as hard as they can at that specific skill? And I think, I'm not sure if it's been touched on yet, but obviously naturally players' roles might increase as they get older. Weight room is a big piece of player development. Can they get quicker, bigger, faster, stronger, which will in turn help them with that skill? And, with our training approach, and this might be something you guys focus on as well, is yes, we believe there's a time and place for that individual one-on-0 skill development. Whether it's with your footwork, your finishing, your passing, that's great. But we really believe in putting players in small-sided games where they can improve their decision-making against live defenders pertaining to that certain area of improvement they want to improve on. We usually go by about the 80-20 rule, where about 20% of the time we want to be working on those individual skills one-on-0. But about 80% of the time, we want to put you in a situation that's very game-like, where you can make those game-like decisions against live defenders to improve that specific area of improvement that the coaching staff has pinpointed. So, player development has a lot of different things that are entailed with it, and every player is different. But just a couple of those bullet points, we love the strengths-based approach, reinforcing those. And we love using statistical analysis to pinpoint areas for players to improve upon. And we love the games-based approach to do that. So those are probably the 3 main steps for on-the-court player development we focus on.
I love that, and I love what you say about tangibles as well, because and how bought in a player. Because if a player's really bought into the program, then they might be going right. I want to really work on becoming the leader of the team or being the captain this year. Whereas one player might be really technical, but they might be training at 2, 3 other clubs, or they might have opportunities to expand elsewhere. So they're attending less training sessions, and they might not be bothered that they're not captain because they might be looking at other clubs elsewhere. And realistically, they're on a leash, and that leash could be chewed through at any time, or they might want to release that so they can move on and so on. So therefore, they're not really as bought in as someone else. So when it comes down to are we looking at their leadership skills, their communication, their relationship, they might actually differ on those areas where they might score less than a player who might be bought in. So then we're highlighting that player as an area of maybe improvement and concern, and we can identify that. And we can put in, say, an intervention or support or mentoring and so on, and that's how we really can help upskill our players and look at it collectively. But those tangibles are important because, again, if you're looking at maybe a grassroots program or various other programs, these players might be putting more time in the gym than the others, so they might be doing more physical work than some of the other players because they want to get bigger, faster, stronger, and so on. So realistically, then they're scoring higher in these areas. So are these players then that we're going to group who are scoring less because they're not in the gym as much or not pushing their physicality? Are we then going to put them through a high intensive physical program to try and upskill them? Well, again, are they do they have that buy into that actual fitness, or do they want natural fitness? Do they want to get bigger, faster, stronger, or do they just want to grow naturally, or do they want to focus on just working on, say, their arms or their legs? And that might be something that comes into play as well. Or then on those programs, so the players have the time to commit to doing that extra commitment. So therefore, it's healthy competition being generated in the team, but we must make sure that the players don't fall far behind, because once we've got these bigger, faster, stronger players, are they then getting selected over the players who are not getting that? And therefore, the players who are not selected, are they the ones bringing up the characteristics that we might miss on the team? So we might lose 5-0 one week because we put all these stronger players on, and the ones who are bulked up and they look really good. But who's been the leader? Who's been able to step up? Who's been the one gelling the team together? And sometimes that less technical player may come on and make that difference. So I think it's great that you touch upon tangibles, and I think that's such an important point to really take in consideration when we look at those data and those entry points, and how we really make that evaluation on players one against each other, and then look at groupings. Then we can take in consideration the personality, because personality can be another one. So we might have players on programs who are, those who want to go getters and get the scholarships, those who play because their friends play, those who play because their parents do, those who play because it's recreational, and those who play it because of other sports. And then there's so many other personalities which come into it. But I think what your player development and how you look at that, I think is really comprehensive and really great to get into.
Absolutely. And, I think with your point being, there's a lot of people, or I should say players, that talk the talk in the off season, where, they're going to do A, B, and B to get better. And a lot of them don't follow through and walk the walk. And again, that's just that intangible piece. And I think it's also important to remind your players that work ethic will open possibilities for you to play for us, but it will not guarantee playing time for us. With that work ethic piece, there's a lot of players that really do work hard, and they're trying their best to get where they want to be. But you also have to understand that players have different ceilings than other players. So, you hate to say it, but there might be a really talented player that has about, has hit or miss work ethic, right? Maybe they go hard 75% of the time, but their talent level is much higher than a player that might not be as talented naturally, but gives 100% work ethic every single time. So I think it's important for players to understand that, working hard at that skill development definitely improves your chance of earning playing time, but it doesn't guarantee it. And that can be a hard pill to swallow. And like we mentioned earlier, that's a pill that I had to swallow. And, looking back at it, maybe I didn't work as hard as I could have. Maybe I did talk the talk without walking the walk. So that's an important distinction for players to grasp as well.
And I think when you've got that honesty and about going on about those game time and maybe those lack of minutes, or they might not be coming off the bench as much as they would like to. Realistically, when you are identifying these areas and you're tracking it through data entry points, and you might be going, right, look at these minutes, how many we've had and how many opportunities they've come on. So they might have had X amount of starts, they might have come off the bench X amount of times, they might have been involved in build-up plays, and we've got all this data available. And then we've also got this evidence where we haven't seen them grow, and we've put in interventions or we've put in mentoring and so on, and we're still not seeing the growth points that we're expecting. So therefore, realistically, you're also helping that evidence-based point whereby if you had to sit down with a player and look at their mentoring chat, or you have to sit with a player and give them a review, or you're releasing a player, or you have to give them an exit interview once they finish the scholarship program, or their parents or so on have come and complained about the amount of minutes or opportunity they've had. Naturally, you've created that entry point for all that evidence base to support what you're doing from the great work that you are doing without that being at the forefront of what you're doing.
Exactly. And that honesty piece. I mean, I think before players get to that stage where they can start to improve those weaknesses and strengths, during when those players can improve on those areas of weaknesses and strengths, and after. I mean, you always have to keep that clear, truthful message to those players as you go. And, balancing that with motivating them and encouraging them while also keeping that realistic approach, I think is very, very important. So a delicate balance, once again, of, coaching. I mean, there's so many things that are always teetering between the gray areas that you have to be really aware of. And that's the challenge and excitement of being a coach, I think.
And say, you complete a 5-year stint where you're currently at and you move on, or you come to the end of it and you're reflecting on your time there as a head coach and what you've done overall as a coach as well. What would you define then as success if you had to reflect back on, say, a 5-year period where you're currently at?
Yeah. So I think a lot of people define success as wins and losses, right? And that's great. But I would define success as truly making an enjoyable experience for my players while getting the most out of every single person on our roster. And not only that, but making sure that your players are having an enjoyable experience where they can feel safe in the environment that you've created to make mistakes and grow. And we also would define success as players being successful in the classroom and reaching those honor roll marks, graduating with high marks, I think is something that we can define as success as well. So, of course, winning is great. And that is a big piece of what people consider success from the outside looking in. But I think if we can max out the potential of the roster that we have, if we can create better individuals and prepare them for their future careers and endeavors, I think that's how we as a program would truly define success besides X's and O's.
And I love that because, it might be about the wins and losses. It might be about that performance that you're looking for, or the university or college or high school that you're currently at might be going, right, we want to achieve this over the 5 years. But whilst you take that away and you might sit another interview for a head coach role, or you might be demonstrating what you've done, you might go, do you know what, look at those 6 players who are playing professional basketball now. That's the success that I've had right there, rather than winning the 4 championships at high school level. So therefore you can see what I've instilled with my team, what my philosophy looks like, how I've mentored these players, how I've got them up to those levels, what they might be taking away. So that's great in terms of that player development, and that relates nicely into what we're doing and that performance. So, whilst you have had that success and what success might look like, what would you define as high performance for a player on your program then?
Yeah, so players and high performance to me means giving 100% every single time you hit the floor. I mean, I think that's a big piece of what high performance is, and making sure that they're trying to execute our program's game plan to the best of their ability, whether it's scouting report with who they're guarding, their role offensively on the team. I think it's a big piece of that high performance. I also think with pregame warmups and post-game rituals to help your body prepare for battle and recover from battle, I think is a underestimated piece of a high-performing player. I think that perseverance and fighting through fatigue while other players might start to decrease their performance, those really elite high-level performers take it to the next level, whether it's the end of the 4th quarter, after a really high-paced start. Another way I would define a high-performing player is with their nutrition and their daily habits, understanding the importance of sleep, a well balanced, healthy meal before, after, for breakfast, is an underestimated piece of a high performing athlete as well, especially at the high school level, where kids are, 14 to 18. And I was in high school once, I could eat anything and my metabolism would take care of it. But looking back at it now, that probably didn't lead me to be able to perform as highly as I could have, eating junk food after practice, going to bed at 2 a.m. So all of those things to me entail a high performing athlete. And a lot of it doesn't have to do with, on court activities as much as off the court activities for me.
And I love that. And I love that you touch on about habits as well, because, that on and off court activity is really important about those habits and what they may look like. And in consideration of those habits comes into play tangibles. And whilst, you might have those good habits to say that good sleep or getting up early, or might have a good nutrition plan, or coming in, having breakfast, preparing themselves for the day, how their outlook may go, some of the tangibles that might be, they might have something going on at home, or they might live with a carer, or they have to be a carer themselves. And therefore they're not able to have that good night's sleep or get the sleep on that time. And it is difficult because we are working with youth players, we're working players at high school level, and sometimes we can interlink high performance and what it looks like, and obviously that's the expectation of the program. But those tangibles come into play as to why those habits may not work. And sometimes we can bring players up on maybe not having that nutrition, and then we might go, right, there's breakfast over there, we can go get it from the canteen, and we can give them that well-being check-in and support. But the realistic point is there, sometimes we're not instilling the good habits whereby they're knowing that they have to get breakfast themselves, and we can do that well-being support and check in and make sure that they've had the breakfast and so on, but they have to take ownership and accountability for doing it themselves, because one day Coach Jake might not be in, or one of the coaching team, and they're playing a game and they might be doing training and so on, and they might collapse on the pitch because they haven't had breakfast. Now realistically, these coaches who will come in might have covered, or they might have been just taking a session without doing the background checks, or might have just had to drop in last minute. But it's been on the responsibility that they haven't come in and had breakfast, that because they haven't had those habits instilled within them. So I think whilst we have that well-being check-in and support, I think instilling good habits and taking ownership of that is really important within that process as well.
I agree. And, even though I'm sitting here saying that's what I would prefer from a high-performing athlete, I know that's a major weakness of mine. I mean, making sure that my players are thinking about those nutritious habits, making sure that my players are hydrating and stretching after sessions. I mean, it's something I could definitely touch on way more. So that's an interesting and good thought-provoking question, because, like I just said, it's easy for us to talk the talk about these things, but it can be really hard to put in motion with all those other things you've got going on as a coach. So it's a good thought-provoking question, and an area that I can definitely improve upon would be emphasizing those off-the-court habits that can lead to that high-performance success.
And I love that then, because essentially you've just reflected and come out with what you said, a weakness. And sometimes it's hard to come out with those weaknesses, especially as we're coaches and maybe we're held into account for, displaying the best behaviours and so on. But I know after I come home from work earlier, I nipped into Sainsbury's and thought, right, I'll get some yogurts and this and that. And then by the time I've looked at my basket, right, I've got a pack of Coca-Colas in there, I've picked up a pack of Monster Munch, and they're alongside the yogurts. And I'm looking at myself going, what am I doing? But, you just, sometimes you drop those habits because, those tangibles have come in, gone, oh, I've seen the nice thing, I want that, and maybe I've pushed myself hard in the gym this week, so I can give myself that bit of relaxation. And sometimes just taking that steam off and not maybe being putting that pressure on. A player is a young player, and as you said yourself, you enjoyed eating when you were young, and seeing a player eat a bag of crisps, sometimes I won't hold that accountable to them, but I'll just go, yeah, they're enjoying life in this moment, and I'm not taking that away from them.
Yeah, and like we talked about, that fine line, right? Of course, you're not going to get upset with a kid for having a pop at school. I mean, they're young enough where it should be fine and healthy, but it's also not a crime to remind them of, hey, we got a game in a couple days. Maybe we could drink some water instead. Don't have to be super harsh with it, but just good reminders, because like you said, I mean, they're high school kids. They want to enjoy the snacks, and they can afford to. And, as we get older, we can't afford that as much because we start to see it in our body a little bit more. But I agree. I agree.
And when it comes down to those habits, then, and obviously we want to instill them, we want to create them. How do we go about making sure that the players instill these good habits, or how can we support them in doing so?
Yeah. So the main thing for me is positive reinforcement. I mean, when you see something great that you want to keep happening, if you want to repeat it, praise it. I think there's a great phrase that is that exact quote of what you praise gets repeated. So I think that positive reinforcement with specific feedback is critical to building those good habits, whether off the court or maybe more importantly, on the court, with being super specific with how you praise your players goes a long way, as opposed to, hey, player A, great job, way to work hard. Maybe you could be a little more specific and say, hey, player A, I really like how you got to the gap there on defense and stopped the ball with your body. Or, hey, player B, I really like how you snapped your wrist on that follow through. I think that's a big piece of building those daily habits and reinforcing them. And along with that, it's not what you teach, it's what you emphasize. And if you continue to emphasize those things that matter to you on the court and off the court, if you continue to praise positively what you want to see as a coach, over time, that's going to be what gets repeated. So I think that's important for us to keep in mind as coaches and educators to build those daily habits is that positive reinforcement piece.
And I truly love that. Now, two key notes that I've just quickly noted down, and I really love that. It's not what you teach, it's what you emphasise, because that really relates to something that I use in the classroom as well. Persistent, consistent, and insistent. And that's something that I spoke about with another member of staff when I first started the role, about behaviours with the young people that we're working with. So if we're persistent, then we're constantly on to them, and we're making sure that we're following up on it. We're consistent by saying it maybe every day and maybe every hour, depending on what we're at. And that we're insistent on them doing it. So we might be persistent on saying it, we might be consistent in showing them and doing it as well, but are we insistent that they are actually doing it and following up on those habits? Because we might give them a message, we might give them key takeaways, we might build it into a program or the curriculum or philosophy, but are they actually going away and practicing it themselves? So again, if that's what you teach, it's what you emphasize, and if you're emphasizing it, realistically they should be taken away, because as my course leader says on uni, it's little and often, and once you do those little and often, you'll see those gains rack up. And those little and oftens are consistent, and therefore it just builds into your natural habits, and then you become naturally good at it. And hopefully then that relates nicely into what you say, because once we do it and once we instill it and we're consistent with it, then the players realistically should start to show it in terms of what they're doing in training, and the reward should pay off, and those outcomes are being demonstrated.
Exactly. And the players figure out pretty quickly what's important to you. And everyone wants to be praised, and everyone wants to feel like they're successful. So when you're using maybe a specific player as an example and you give that positive praise specific to what you want as a coach, other players see that. And not only do they want to maybe correct themselves to do that, but they hope to do that to get your positive praise as well. So I think keeping that 4-to-1 positive to correction feedback is critical, and building those players up with that positive reinforcement of those habits you want and combining that with that positive corrective feedback, I think is critical to that player's success. Because like we said before, being positive doesn't mean it's all sunshine and rainbows. There will be times where you have to be assertive and you have to correct players to do things correctly, but you've built that positive relationship and that confident player through emphasizing what you deem important.
And when it comes down to it then, you said how you praise those players goes a long way. And I think that's really important, because there are some little moments that I can consistently play in my mind, or I might relate back to, and I have no idea why they're in my mind, but they're stuck out in terms of like some film clip that has just been left there. And that's important for players, because as I think of that, I think of the player. So as we might say of something, or we might just drop a comment on them, they might be thinking about that all night long, or it might still resonate with them 2 or 3 years on, and then suddenly they're like that perspective is key, because they might be like, do you know what, Coach Jake actually meant it in this way, but realistically you didn't. So how you praise them is really important, because they might hold that in good stead and go, do you know what, I'm actually good at doing this, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to throw a hoop, and I might score at the most critical moment. But also in terms of that language and that terminology and that perspective comes into it. So when it comes down to praising those players, how do you go about doing that? And do you use specific language when you focus on that conversation?
Yeah. So typically it is clear, concise, and positive. Clear, concise, and positive. Because eventually you also don't want that to become white noise. The coaches on the sideline that are always yelling during the game itself eventually just becomes drowned out to your players, and they won't listen to you. And I think the same can be said for that positive, specific feedback. If you're telling every single player the same exact thing, word travels fast, right? And after a while, those positive remarks that you're giving players almost turn to white noise. So I think it's critical to be clear with what you saw, the action that you saw that the player did. I think it's critical to be concise in a 15 to 20-second remark. And I think you have to do it in a way that's unique to that player. If you tell every single player, hey, you did a great job boxing out there, way to be physical, over time, that just starts to drown out. So being really critical in what you think about for that player specifically, and maybe even tracking after practice. I told player A this. I told player C that. Maybe tomorrow I pinpoint these couple players before practice and I give them another piece of positive feedback and what I'd like to see more of today at practice. So that's how I would respond to that, is, being positive without being too broad and over speaking, because it can turn to white noise, for better or for worse.
And again, comes in that fine balance, as we said earlier on, because, you might be going, good, that's good, and so on, and you might repeat that. And say you have 2 coaching sessions with players over your week, just say on your average team, by the time over a month, that's eight sessions. Over the course of a year, you're looking at 80 to 90 sessions, and that's without games going in. So you might have, say, over 100 contacts with them, and therefore the total hours might total up 200 hours. For 200 hours, all they've heard is good, 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 good. So you've consistently reinforced that message, and they might be taking that away. But for some players, like, all I'm hearing is good, good, good. Whereas there might be a key point for a player where you might go, that was excellent, that was really good, good. And therefore they might go, oh, do you know what, actually, and they might build off that confidence. Whereas if we're too overpraising and we're too positive, then they're going to be like, oh, he's just saying good again, or oh yeah, I hear that all the time. So it's that fine balance of when we can really know when we pick players up, when we know we have to go in and give that positive reinforcement, and trying to utilize it in a way where it doesn't become white noise. And I think that's a key around what it is, because a couple of professional learning courses and courses I've been on are like, just consistently reinforce the message of good, that's excellent, really well done. But sometimes when you overdo it, and you may reflect over, say, just 2 sessions, how many times did you actually say good or well done? And therefore, if you look at that over a course of a season, it's good that you've emphasized it, but maybe you've overkilled it as well. So I think that's a key point, what you said there.
Yeah, and I liked your point on, all those training sessions that add up. And gosh darn it. If you saw me right now, it would be quite the show. Trying to get this light on. What is that? 3 times?
Yeah, 3 times, I think, yeah.
Man, luckily I move. Luckily I move around a lot as a teacher. There we go. But yeah, with sample size, I mean, let's say you do have 100 interactions with a player. Like we talked about, that 4-to-1 positive to area of improvement ratio. If you are interacting with a player 100 times, we'd like 75 times to be that positive specific reinforcement. What gets praised gets repeated. But about 25% of the time, we'd want that corrective feedback. You need to do this in order to be successful. And that is a good ratio to follow, in my opinion, because if you want to have that positive culture, yes, you need to have that reinforcement. You need to emphasize what you need to emphasize and praise that. Like we've said it again and again, it really can't be all sunshine and rainbows, or else you're never going to get better.
Absolutely, and I think that's what it's about. It's understanding that criticality and understanding how you can go about developing that. And that 4-to-1 ratio is important as well, because you might have then 8 real positives and then 2 negatives, or 2 areas of improvement. And sometimes players might see that as a negative, just thinking on the perspective, because they might go, right, I've had 8 positive points, but realistically, I want to see these 2 as negatives. I want to see them as my weaknesses. So then, how do I improve them? How do I get better? And some players will absolutely go, I'm going to forget about the 2 and focus on the 8, and some players will go, forget about the 8 and look at the 2. So it's that real fine balance which you're doing really well. And once we're looking at it over a season, we have outweighed the areas of improvement with the positives, which is good. But by the time the end of the season comes around, there are a lot of areas to improve, and that's excellent, because unless we're identifying those areas to really improve, then we're going to lack on so many areas where the players haven't. So therefore, have we had success in the way that they've grown and that they've moved on? But I think what you're doing in that 4-to-1 ratio, and I think how you approach that is really interesting. I think that works well. And you say about delivering on that game plan, how that might look on match day and so on. And I was listening to psychologist Dan Abrahams yesterday, and he was talking about game plans, but in the terms of match scripts. And match scripts he broke down into performance goals and process goals. So performance goals might be, I'm going to complete X amount of passes, or I'm going to score X amount of goals. But as you've sort of related on as well in terms of that terminology and saying to a player how you might look at something or how you might throw the ball and so on, he actually spoke about the things that can be controlled that helps generate focus. So realistically, as you've said earlier on, you're creating that focus to control the controllables. And we talked about the controllables, and there might be so many, as we said, and that relates into that player development, because we control what the player might do on the program, but those tangibles that kick into play and they don't want to get into the gym to get bigger, faster, stronger, we don't have control over that. That's their controllables, therefore creates that all-round system, and look at what their accountability and their ownership is in terms of those good habits, and that is how you build in player development.
Yeah, and I love that phrase, control the controllables. That's something that we talk about a ton. And, in basketball terms, there's a lot of controllable things that have nothing to do with putting the ball in the basket. The process of how our team's getting that shot, your defensive intensity and your on-court communication, your willingness to be physical on rebounds. I mean, all sports are really, really, really focused on those things that you can control, as opposed to the outcome of a missed shot. And a lot of those younger players that you see, they're more outcome oriented than process oriented. So it really is a constant battle to remind them and emphasize with them of controlling what you can control. And especially with your work ethic and body language, I mean, those are huge for our program. So, of course, you can control the effort you put into improving your shot and improving your finishing ability or your passing. But once game time rolls around, I mean, it's on to the next play. We're sticking to what we can control, and we try to model that as coaches as well. Because how dumb does that look? I've been there too. How dumb does that look where you're screaming at a kid on the sideline, hey, relax. You got to relax. And everyone looks at you like, coach, you're the only one screaming. You're making a fool out of yourself. So I think being able to model that for your players through those intense situations is critical as well. Or else you're going to look like a hypocrite, asking your players of those things while you're doing the exact opposite,
And I completely agree there as well, because sometimes we can overhype a situation. And I was just having a conversation with a member of staff this morning, and we were looking back on a situation that arose last week amongst some young people we had, and we're like, do you know what, this situation's actually escalated because of the members of staff involved. They've actually bigged up that situation, and it's grown bigger and bigger because it hasn't actually needed to get to that point, but it's been those involved that have blown up the situation in that sense. So when it comes down to it, just maybe going, oh, I'm shouting relaxing, but I'm the only one doing it. Sometimes you just need to sit in our chair and go, yeah, I'm just going to watch the game for 5 minutes and see what happens.
Yeah. And that's so true is, all coaches mean well in that regard, where they're trying to model what they'd like their players to do. But, when you really sit back and reflect on it, you realize that most of the time it doesn't really make sense what coaches are saying, and it's not matching up with what they're hoping to instill with their players. So that's something I always try to think about as well is, and gosh, I keep going back to the phrase walking the walk and talking the talk, but I mean, you're going to lose credibility with your players and your program if you're asking them to do something that you're not willing to do and show. So that's a big piece of leadership that I think is underestimated by some.
Absolutely. And I think, it's important when it comes down to, that character and what we see on the field and off the field and controlling the controllable. So when it comes down to match day then, do you have a set ritual or, that match script whereby you might have players, right, the expectation is get at this time, whilst you're in the change room, we're going to talk about this, and then we're going to go out onto the pitch and do this? Or is it, right, the change room's going to be a free flow, I might come in, do my team talk, we then focus on the game, and then we might reflect a little bit after? Or is it more of a routine, that script, that ritual which you might complete on a match day?
Yeah, I'd say most of our game day rituals are solidified and they're routine. Typically we'll ask the players to get there however many minutes before the game to get ready. In the locker room, we let the players do their own thing. They're listening to music, they're getting mentally engaged however they like. And then we'll typically do a pregame meeting in a classroom or a locker room, depending on the situation, where we'll have different scouting report pieces, what we plan to do offensively and defensively, opponent personnel, keys to victory. But we also try not to overload our players with too much information on that game day. They mostly serve as more reminders because things before that should have been brought up previously. And that is definitely more of a lock-in time that is coach-led, where we're giving them final reminders, we're getting our ducks in a row to be successful on the court. And once we've had that pregame meeting, we'll send the players out to their pregame warm-ups where they can get their bodies warm on the court, get their mental game strong, and then we usually bring them back in about 7 or 8 minutes before we go back out. So we definitely keep our pregame rituals very routine, and although that may look different on a game-by-game basis, most players will know that routine. And after games, I'm very big on keeping it short and sweet. Coaches and players are emotional, for better or for worse. We like to give them one area or reminder of positivity, and we like to give an area of things that we can improve upon, for better or for worse, and then we leave it at that. Because you know how it goes in the heat of competition. There are things that you just naturally forget, and they're typically speaking, after a loss, it's never as bad as you think it is. And after a win, it's never as great as you think it is. So it's important to keep an even keel mindset after games, and then it allows you time to watch the film, reflect, take notes, before being a little more direct with what you want to emphasize the next day at practice, as opposed to making it's really a lose-lose, in our opinion, to have those long, deep conversations with teams after a game, win or loss. Because I'm sure you've been there before or after games as a player where, you're already thinking about the next thing, right? You're thinking about your after-game plans. You're thinking about how badly you played or how greatly you played. And we just don't find those after-game talks beneficial. We'd rather do some reflecting and get our own ducks in a row before saying something we wouldn't mean or might not be true.
And I love that because it's such a simple process and a platform that you can really approach that, because, as you say, you can really overcomplicate the players. So you might have had practice a day before and then you've gone, right, I want to do this game plan, I want to execute this. And then you've got players with their individual roles. Then you might have spoken to the players beforehand. Then they're speaking to each other. Then your assistant coach might give that feedback. And then you set those instructions, what they want in terms of those individual roles. Then you might have done a tactical change. Then the game might be flowing in one way and you've had to alter it, and therefore those players are, by the time they've listed and they've layered out every piece of information they've had, they're realistically going to be overloaded and they're going to be information filled. So just breaking it down, and what I love that service as reminders, because what's the point of practice without having what you're doing naturally? Because it should be a reminder. Yeah, you know how to work off recovering the ball and breaking away and what we might do within that transition. So therefore, that's a reminder of what we do in training. And then you might have the objective of, right, I want to see you shoot on the left-hand side of the court and try and score a hoop out from that side because that's where your weakness is, and I want to see you getting out there, for more example. But service as reminders is quite a key takeaway in terms of that, because we can give all this information, we can overload them, but sometimes they are just reminders, and we got a game plan to execute. And if we're doing it to the appropriate coaching levels or the levels that we've instilled, we're going to do it quite naturally, and it's just part of that player development, especially if they're at younger ages like we coach. Reminders are very critical, rather than this information deployment where we have a full script of information we want to give them.
And I think you hit the nail on the head right there of pre-game routines, and really just philosophy as a coach in general is the KISS method, which is keep it simple, stupid. There's also great terms that go along the lines of paralysis by analysis, or when your head's thinking too much, your feet are moving too slow, or whatever phrase you want to use. That is so true. I mean, I've seen some coaches that before games have the entire whiteboard filled with notes and information and plays and diagrams. And you cannot tell me that that is beneficial to anyone in any type of way. I don't care if it's Coach K. I don't care, which is Coach Shudesky, who's the old Duke coach. Whoever the greatest coach of all time is, whatever. I think that is never the answer to help your players prepare for a game. Because it's so true that if you're overloading those players, I mean, what pieces of information are they going to remember? And I think you really need to think about the most critical piece of information you'd like your player to remember, right? Maybe we're preparing for a game and, specific to a player's matchup, who they're defending when we're on defense. And yes, you could write a chapter book about all of that player's tendencies. Maybe they like to go right 73% of the time. Maybe they shoot 63% from 15 feet from the left wing. But, really, are 16-year-old kids going to remember that? Or is it going to be more beneficial for that player to remember, hey, the player I'm guarding is a really good three-point shooter? Or, hey, the player I'm guarding is a really good driver with their right hand? I mean, to me, that seems a little bit easier for players to grasp than all of those details that coaches might need to know, right? But really probably aren't that important to the player in order to help them be successful.
Absolutely, and I absolutely love that question as well. What critical information do you want your player to remember? And I think that is just such a simple question, but a key question, because it's like, we're just breaking that down and going, right, what can we just give, player Katie or player Josie? And that one piece of information could be the piece of information where we see them unlock the game, or we're seeing that real success come out, or they're having repetition, and therefore we've hit an objective or an area of improvement, because everything else is serving as a reminder. So that one key question, which is such a great question, but so simple as well, and not to devalue it by saying it's a simple question, but it is just for coaches to remember, because they might have a playbook, they might have a full script, they might have every chapter available, but just by recalling one question, going, right, that's just the information I want to give these 10 players individually, and then I've got 10 pieces of different information or objectives for players to work on. Collectively, we've got 10 different outcomes, 10 different pieces of success, and how does that look, say, over a course of 4 games and so on. But rather than overloading it, and rather than giving too much information, I think that serves as a great question really to ask and put into play. So again, when it comes down to how coaches can support that player development, how they might approach a game, how they might focus or realign what their real focus point is, because as you were saying it, thinking 2-3 steps ahead or thinking about beyond, they just need to be in that moment and maybe just have that core focus. And if that's now one piece of information that is serving as a reminder, then they're going to be focused on maybe that, and that's what that outcome is going to be really successful, rather than going, Coach Jake said this, Coach Johnny said this, and then they're trying to recall all this, then they're trying to recall the game plan from the day before, they're trying to remember what their areas of improvement on. Their teammate is saying do this, do that, and they're trying to react to the game in that process as well. Whereas, one piece of information, react to listen to your teammate, they're going to really strip down and define how they can focus and really then give that increased performance because of one key question.
Agreed. And you mentioned that, and I agree that it is a simple question. And I think the hardest thing for coaches to do is, yes, it's a simple question, right? What do my players need to know? But it can be oh so hard to execute in the grand scheme of things when there's so much to do and so much that you'd like your players to grasp and understand. The really elite coaches can take any concept or any piece of information they have, and they can give it to their players in the simplest terms. And that is also, albeit an easy question, it is so hard to answer, if that makes any type of sense.
Absolutely, it does. Of course, it does, and I completely agree with you there because again, it comes down to that perspective, and we might get that film, or we might clip it back, or we might recall that situation and recreate it in training. But realistically, the players got so many different decisions. At the end of the day, they've made the decision that they've made best in the moment of it. Again, unless we're really reflecting on it, or that focus or process is there, then that's what they're always going to naturally do. But we can only build in those good habits and then serve those reminders whereby once they're in that process, we're seeing those improvements because they've been able to have that processive journey. And as you said, that they're going to be process orientated rather than goal orientated for others. Or if players are goal orientated, then we're going to instill those good habits whereby they can help achieve that naturally. So then that creates that all-round circle into what player development is and how that looks. And the same might be asked for when you prepare for a season. As you said, it's a long season in basketball. But how do you prepare for a season? Do you break it into blocks? Also, you've mentioned game by game, but is it blocks? Do you go by term? How do you approach a season overall?
Sure. So really in basketball season, we'd say there's quote unquote two parts of the season. Typically, the first part of the season goes from the very first day of practice to Christmas break, which is towards the end of December. And then after that break, you kind of break into the second part of the season from January through hopefully March. So when it comes to those goals and those desired outcomes that we have during the preseason, we will sit together as a team and we'll go through outcome-based goals. Your typicals would be, hey, we want to compete for that district championship. We want to compete for that conference championship. Hey, we want to make that state tournament, right? But that can be very cliche and outcome oriented. So once we've decided on those outcomes that we'd like to pursue throughout a season, we focus more on how we can do that. And one thing we always focus on is game by game statistics that we feel as a program can help us lead to success. So yes, we lay out the desired outcomes, but we're focusing much more on those day-by-day habits and day-by-day processes that we can combine with together to reach those desired outcomes. And typically with those game-by-game goals, we focus on about 4 big areas on offense and 4 big areas on defense that we feel if we can be successful in statistically, game by game, we can improve. Game by game, once we accomplish these, it helps us be successful, and we can slowly but surely reach those desired outcomes. So I think those outcomes are important to have as realistic, desired things to achieve, but I think it's important to also think about the day-by-day processes of, yes, this is great, but what are some things we can focus on as a basketball team? What are some of those intangible things we can focus on for our team standards that will help us get to those desired outcomes? So just that delicate balance of the process leading to those outcomes, I think is important to emphasize and can be very hard to do as well.
And I completely agree. And I think those questions, again, what you ask and those day by day processes are really important, because sometimes we might look at a course of the season, and we might overplan for it. And then, the player gets injured, or we might have a new player transfer in, or one transfer out, or, the team dynamics aren't in the right place, or we might be going through a low point. So if you just focus on those day by day habits, and again, that's where the day by day processes, and that's where the importance of good habits come into play, and how we can support in off the field activities to really overcome maybe the areas that the team might be falling short in, or the team that might be struggling within. It really helps get past those points and generate beyond that. And there comes that player development once again, because you're going to see those who are willing to step up, and those who are going to come off the bench and make that difference, those who are going to be the real leaders, those who might show a caring, compassion, and empathetic supporting approach for their teammate who might be out for a period of time. How could they reintegrate them? And I think that creates that great team philosophy, that great team boundary in terms of how you approach the season. And really flipping it into two parts is good, because by the time you get to the second part, you might go, right, we're into January now. Breathe, stop, start, and go again. And we can park the first part of the season, but let's try and approach this and really look at whether we've had X amount of wins in this quarter or this half of this return. And again, it's not all about the wins and losses, but if you're seeing an improvement in wins, then how can we break it down in success? Or we've changed the team shape, or we got players who are progressing because of their mentoring sessions, or this player is now starting to work on these areas of improvement, and we're starting to see more of outcomes because they might have more minutes and so on. So therefore, it creates that holistic, synergized approach to that player development and that pathway.
Agreed. And, sometimes when you do list those outcome-based goals, there's going to be a lot of times where you don't reach those by the end of the year. And that's why we think it's so important to have those foundational pillars of what you want as a program to withstand that wave, so to speak. And like we mentioned before, that's that work ethic piece, that team unity, that positive environment, and being resilient. And I think once you've laid that foundation, you're more able to withstand the storm that's bound to come in a long season like that. And if you can stay true to that foundation, you can stay true to the rules, expectations, and standards that you have as a program. You can make it to the other side of that storm while still being intact together and still believing in each other. Because you're a fool if you think your season's going to go smoothly at all times. It's just not the case. We've been coaching long enough that we know something negative will happen. More times than not, multiple negative things. So being able to trust what you've laid down as the core of your program, I think is important to be able to fall back on when the road gets rocky.
And I love that. And again, another key takeaway and something that takes away. But when it comes into that rocky road and the negatives that we see over a season, and obviously a season can be a long period of time, as you said, over that time, you're going to see a lot of emotions maybe spiral because of the team situation, or the lack of minutes, or maybe where the players are, or maybe what they've experienced. And when it comes down to those emotions, how do you unpack those emotions, and how do you explore them as a coach and as a team?
I think the main piece to handling those emotions is having that trusting, caring, personal relationship with all of your players. And being purposeful with that connection, I think, can really allow those players to feel more comfortable coming to you with those emotions and sharing those feelings with you. And with that being said, I believe that coaches have a bad habit of always trying to correct and give advice. I do it. I think it's just in our nature. And it's important to realize that when those players do share those emotions with you, whether it's their problems or successes, that more times than not, you're just lending an open ear. And you kind of take off the coaching hat and take on more of the hat of, I'm here to listen. I don't need to always be giving you advice. I want to continue to be here for you as a person, and that's not going to come unless you're purposeful with those relationships you've built previously. Along with that, I think it's important to have that genuine connection with players. Because, as you know, players can sniff out the fake. If you're not being your real, authentic self, I don't think that they're going to want to be their real, authentic self with you as well. So I think that's the first piece of handling some of those emotions throughout a season, is that hopeful, close bond you have with players. And I think something that can really help with those emotions as well is having those expectations that you want as a program in place before those emotions or different situations arise, such as, hey, you can come talk with us as a coaching staff, and we are here to listen, but here's a list of things that we won't talk about with you. Or here's a list of things we won't talk about with your parents. So I think preparing in advance for as many of these situations as you can are important as well. But that's how I would answer the question over handling those emotions throughout a season.
And when it comes down to obviously having those expectations and setting that up for a player that may come into the program, what areas may you not explore with them, for example?
Yeah, so specifically to, playing time or role on team, one big thing for us is we're never going to discuss other players with you. Maybe player A comes in, hey, I really feel like I'm playing better than player B right now, or I've been putting more time in than player C. Making sure that we steer that conversation away from comparison and focus specifically more on that player herself, I think is a big thing to communicate with players early. And honestly, off the top of my head, that's about all I can think of right now as really an off-limits conversation. Everything else is fairly open to us, but they also have to understand if there is a situation where we might have to tell other people that we have the liberty to do that as well, if it does maybe get a little more personal than you were expecting.
Of course, and I think that's great because there was a good documentary that was on Channel 4 here in the UK, and it focused on Crystal Palace, the football club, and what it really breached into was the academy setup, and there was one parent who was a single mother, just to give some context around it, and she was very much at training, very much involved in the boys' life, made sure there was commitment, but he just wasn't physically growing compared to the other boys, and he just was struggling within that setup at the time, and there was nothing to say that he might not grow over a period of time and get somewhere in 4 years' time, or might be at a better level. But there and now, at that period of time, he was just struggling physically. And because he was struggling physically, he wasn't advancing as technically as some of the other boys. So whilst on this documentary, she went over to the coach and then started criticising, quite open in front of the other parents as well, the players that were literally on the pitch. And realistically, when it comes into that and touching upon that, she was trying to then compare and try and argue her son's point on the basis of other players. But that was quite unfair on A, those players, and B, the coach then, because he was then put into a situation whereby she was trying to force him to talk about the situation of others. And when it comes down just to that player development and that individualistic player and where they're going, it's really unfair then to bring other players into perspective when you are focusing on maybe Katie and what Katie's performance is. And just because, say, player Lowry is really outperforming her and is really doing well and is keeping her off her minutes, for example, it's not an area to discuss what Lowry's doing or why she's keeping her out. It's what Katie needs to do to try and get their back over Lowry. So I think there's a key takeaway for any coach, and maybe a coach maybe starting out, is serve as a reminder. Don't discuss other players with other players or their situations and family. And I think just touching upon that little point there is a real learning curve for someone who might just be starting out their coaching journey.
Absolutely. And, maybe even more so than those boundaries that you have with players in those emotional conversations, I think it's more than critical to have very clear and concise expectations for your parents as well. And we could have a whole nother conversation on parent guidelines and expectations and relationships with you as a coaching staff. But definitely food for thought for young coaches as well is make sure you are very clear and concise with what you want that relationship to be, and stay firm with that. And with players too. Stay firm with what you believe in, and you got to do what you say. You got to do what you say.
Absolutely, and I completely agree, and I think that's a key takeaway. And whilst we've had a heavy focus on player development and where the conversation has naturally gone, and there's so much in that. Over a course of the season, there might be a lot of opportunities for players to have an invite to a club, or they might be on a national level, or academy might come in, etc. However, that may work in America. But is there anything that you might see detrimental to player development that could hinder their progress because of external opportunities or factors, for example?
I think so. And I think a lot of those could potentially start at home, where parents, guardians, or family members may be emphasizing a philosophy with their players that might be different than what the coaching staff would like to see from that player. And that's why we think it's so important to have that unified front with players' families, with players' AAU coaches or club coaches, to make sure that we're all clear on and on the same page of how we think that player can be successful. So, yeah, I think that could be a major hindrance to that player development. And again, like we talked about, those intangibles of if a player is really not all bought in, if a player really doesn't truly believe that they can improve, can all be negatives to that player reaching their full potential.
Absolutely. And how do you generate a healthy competition within your team around that then?
Yeah. So I think in any type of competitive situations, whether it's some skill sessions or full practices, you have to make every single thing you can competitive. Whether it's something as simple as keeping score for every single drill, I think that you have to make sure that there's consequences for the teams that lose. I also think that it's important to emphasize specific things within those drills that you want to see as a program to make that more competitive. Such as, maybe we're playing a 3-on-3 game, and maybe we'll give a team 4 extra points if they score inside the paint. Or maybe we'll give a team 1 extra point if they get an offensive rebound in that drill. So I think making sure that there's healthy competition in those practices makes players go a little harder. I think it makes them take it more serious. So I think that's a big piece of practice planning and skill development planning that needs to be done to foster that competitive environment.
I love that, and I think that's great about how you've done that, and how that supports player development and gives that overall arching journey towards what that may look like off the field, how you get onto the field, how it looks in that environment, what the values, what the philosophy is, how that's upholded for the high score, how that may look on match day, the information that you might give, the reflection points, how you may introduce a player to a program, those boundaries for players and parents, and there's so much within that which actually takes away and contributes to player development and how that looks. And even when it comes to that framework which you've naturally described, and how you may feedback with them, and what points you may set for that development, how you approach the season over 2 halves, I think really wraps up and demonstrates over a great conversation for the hour and a half that we've been going, in terms of what player development is, and really appreciate your time on this. And it's something that we could go on and talk about for 3 hours, but I think for this I've really enjoyed it. And as you've been chatting, I've been writing, taking so many notes, because there's so many key takeaways which I've really wanted to note on and get to that at that point. But I think it's wonderful to have had the time on your day, and not to take up too much more of it, especially in your busy schedule. And even though you have this downtime, it's nice to have that and make the most of it, because otherwise downtime goes and comes too quickly. But it's been insightful to understand what that is, and really have what I would call the player development episode, and really generate this with you, Jake.
Yeah, man, I deeply appreciate you having me on. This has been a blast. I've only done a handful of podcasts, and they're always truly basketball related with X's and O's. And this is really the first time I've had a chance to hop on and talk about some thought-provoking questions that I haven't thought about in a while. So just being able to rattle my brain about some of these unique questions that I don't always get to think about has been a blast, and it's actually helped me reflect a lot as well. So I'm looking forward to listening back again so I can take some notes. And it's been a really enjoyable experience for me. So I appreciate what you're doing, and I really enjoyed it.
Well, I'm really glad, and I love that feedback. And it's one that I'm really truly grateful for, especially for your time as well. And I'm glad it could be a little bit different, and get those thought provoking processes. But before you go, would you mind if I threw some quick fire questions at you?
No, man, go for it. I'm ready.
Wicked. If you had to have someone describe you in 3 words, what 3 words would they be?
Hold on a second.
No problem.
All right, more time, coach.
Perfect. Yeah. So if you had to have someone describe you in 3 words, what 3 words would they be?
Energetic, organized, energized, organized, and humorous.
Yep, love that. I completely agree as well. If you could move to any country to coach, what country would it be?
Spain.
Spain, love that. Catch the tan, loving life. If you could spend a day with any coach or manager, who would it be?
Jay Wright when he was at Villanova.
Love that. If you could manage any player, who would it be?
Ooh. Has to be LeBron James.
Love that one. Just imagine managing him.
Oh, gosh.
Who was or is your role model?
You froze up on me. I couldn't hear that one.
That's right. I think it happened. Who was or is your role model?
My mom and my grandpa.
Love that. I love personal ones. What is if you weren't coaching, what else would you be doing?
I would for sure be teaching, and I've also been interested in psychology, so maybe something in that field.
Yeah, love that. Interested. What would you teach?
I would continue to teach elementary school at the 4th and 5th grade level.
Love that. Love working with kids at that age. So open to life and what happens. If you weren't coaching basketball, what other sport would you be coaching?
That's a good one. I think I would have been interested in coaching football.
Yeah.
American.
That's interesting. Throw-ins involved in that as well, I suppose.
Yeah, honestly, I've never even considered that. So probably football.
That's wicked. You never know. You never know. You could be the next Ted Lasso in transfer sports.
True.
What is your biggest pet peeve?
Disorganized people.
Completely agree. Honestly, it's my biggest bugbear. My argument with my players is if I can get here early, you can get here on time.
Exactly.
What is your most favorite thing to do in your downtime?
I enjoy learning more about basketball and reading a good thriller.
Love that. What is your favorite film?
I really enjoy the Batman trilogy and Shutter Island with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Top choices. What is your favorite TV show?
Ozark on Netflix.
See, I just couldn't get into that. I think I got 2 episodes in, but it's one that I've got to stick with.
Very slow and gritty.
Yeah. Bit like Breaking Bad. That was hard at times. Yeah. What are your non-negotiables?
My non-negotiables would have to be not working as hard as you can, being disorganized, and like you mentioned, being on time. So staying organized, being on time, and working as hard as you can.
I thought so. I thought I was answering that as I was listening to you, but I thought I'd double check, see if you had any more in there. And the final one, what is the one thing you enjoy most about coaching?
I just enjoy the relationships that I get to build with those players and their families. Truly being able to enjoy being around your players is a skill in itself. And I'm lucky enough here at Elkhorn South where even though I'm new, it feels like I've been here for years. The players have bought in, and they're a really enjoyable group to be around. And I hope that it's the same for them and we can continue to build things together. So definitely just being around the players and getting to know them, it's very enjoyable for me.
And I'm sure vice versa, they would completely say the same. And, from the conversation we've had, I know they're very lucky to have someone like you and someone who's thinking about the game which they have and putting the player at the forefront. And if the relationship comes out because of that, or the relationship is the emphasis, or the relationship is a key focus, then I'm sure they can have an enjoyable experience. And when they're in their 20s, they'll be thankful that Coach Jake and be hitting him up and looking him up on the national American team coach and looking at what they've contributed as well. But as I said, it's been wonderful to speak to you. And honestly, there's so much within this, but it's been great to meet you, connect, and it's been great to find out who you are and the way you approach things. And as I said, it's been wonderful to speak to you, and I do really appreciate your time. And I think it's going to be an awesome episode.
I hope so, man. And again, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me as well. And you've got me on Twitter. Feel free to reach out. We can talk hoops. We can talk leadership anytime you'd like. So I really enjoyed this, and I appreciate the kind words. And I'm looking forward to the future, man. Keep up the good work, by the way, and keep growing the game.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate you for helping me progress that. But as I said, I'll keep in touch, and it'd be great if we can get another one on together. But thank you from me.
You bet, man. I'll talk with you soon, all right?
Yeah, thank you very much. Cheers, Jake.
Bye.
Bye.